why we don't do that. It's fine. They're fine. It's fine. It's all fine. Cool. Well, we're not doing that anymore. Okay. Great. Hey BookTube, it's Nick. I'm in a little bit of a different location today, trying something new, trying to figure out my brand. I don't really like being in front of my bookshelf because it's very small and you can't even see it, so this is my background today. We're just gonna deal with it. It's fine. So in case you didn't figure it out by the title, this is my March wrap-up, and I read a total of 9 books this month. That total does include 2 graphic novels and 3 audiobooks. So the first book that I read in March was The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan. This is the final book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, and one of my, if not my, top favorite book of the series. I did say in my last wrap-up that the 4th and 5th books of this series are really kind of where it peaks for me. A lot happens, there's a lot of just character growth and things that go down, and I really feel like everyone kind of comes into their own in these novels, and I need to stop spinning in my chair. I'm so sorry. This is why I can't have spinny chairs. The Last Olympian is an epic conclusion to an iconic series, and obviously for spoiler reasons I'm not going to go into exactly what happens in this one, but as you can probably guess, the final battle happens in this one. There's a lot of devastating things that happen, but even though the series technically does continue with the spin-off series and other books written by Rick Riordan in the same universe, it does feel very complete to me. So I do think that this is one of the best series finales out there, personally. Also, like I said in my last wrap-up, I am going to rant a little bit about something. So, like the other books in the Percy Jackson series, during this reread of mine, I've completed the series now a total of 3 times. I listened to the audiobook for this one, and the whole series is narrated by the same person, and that is one Jessie Bernstein. Now, I am not a violent person. I don't necessarily consider myself a pessimist, but I'm not violent. I don't typically want to fight people, but Jessie Bernstein can fight me. I have never listened to an audiobook with a narrator that I hated more than I did with this series, and it is a good thing that I have already read and loved this series multiple times, because if this was my first time diving into the world of Percy Jackson, I would have stopped after the first book, because Jessie Bernstein did such a disservice to these books. Honestly, the disrespect. Now, as a very clearly white person, I don't know if I technically have the right to say what is and isn't okay, but there are people of color in these books, and they have lines, you know, they have dialogue, and so with there only being one narrator, he has to say those lines, and to me, again, as a white person, it just seemed a little offensive, the way that he did those voices. For example, there are some Latinx people and Hispanic people in these books, like Chris Rodriguez, and his voice for Chris Rodriguez, it's that very like stereotypical Mexican voice. I hate saying that, but that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a white person making fun of somebody who's Latinx. That's what it sounds like, and I hate it. And there are also Asian people in these books, like Annabeth's stepmom and Ethan Nakamura, and his voices for them are terrible. And it's not like, I'm not just mad because he's a white man doing accents for different people. That's not my concern, because you can do that respectfully. However, when you give literally anybody with an Asian sounding last name a broken English, very stereotypical Asian accent, I'm gonna go off and I'm gonna be a little mad, because it was just really, really bad. It was very, very hard to listen to, and I can only imagine being a Latinx or Asian child and listening to that and then wondering, do I sound like that? Is that how other people see me? Is that how white people see me? Ooh, it's just, it's very cringy and I don't like it. So, too long, didn't read. Jesse Bernstein, square up. Okay, I'm recording this on my phone because my laptop refuses to record audio for some reason right now. But I can't believe that I forgot to mention this in my rant. But the first offense that Jesse Bernstein ever did in the audiobooks was giving Apollo a southern accent. And personally, I don't feel that Apollo should have a southern accent. If anything, he should have a surfer accent, but I'm really glad he didn't give him one because Luke's surfer accent was terrible. But yeah, he gave Apollo a southern accent and it just didn't fit. Nothing against them. My whole family has southern accents. I used to have one myself. It still comes out sometimes, even though I try to hide it, and I've worked very hard to get rid of it. Again, nothing against it, just don't want it for me personally. And then in the last books, we finally meet Persephone and Demeter, and Persephone sounds like she has laryngitis. And Demeter sounds like she's the freaking Mad Hatter. So I don't know how I forgot to rant about this when I was recording my wrap up because I was so heated about this. And I could not believe that he would just do those characters dirty like that because they did nothing wrong. But yes, this is now the official end of my rant. I'm sorry you had to suffer through that. On a slightly better note, the next novel that I did read was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. This one I do have the ebook version of, so I'll put a picture here so you can see it. It actually has quite a few covers, so I'll put a different one here and a different one here. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this book. It's all over BookTube right now, and Alice Oseman is a pretty popular YA author. She's from the UK, and she debuted her first novel at, I believe, 17, so that got her quite a bit of hype. Her first novel, Solitaire, I actually did read last year, and I gave about 4 stars. I think if I read it again, I would probably give it maybe a 3, personally. It was okay. I enjoyed it. Didn't really connect with the characters too much, but that's not what we're talking about. Sorry to get off topic. Radio Silence is her second novel, and it follows a girl named Frances as she is going through the motions of applying to her dream university. And it also follows a boy named Aled. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm trying my best. And he actually is the creator of a podcast called Universe City, and Frances is obsessed with this podcast. She does fan art for it. She listens to every new episode as soon as it comes out, re-listens to old episodes. But Frances and Aled become friends, and Frances finds out that Aled is the creator of her favorite podcast, and it ensues from there. It deals with struggling to find yourself between academics and your social life and the in-between, and Frances struggles with, am I good enough to get into my dream school? What if I don't get into my dream school? I can see why it's important to so many people. Personally, since it's been 6 years since I've graduated high school and I never planned on going to formal university, I couldn't exactly relate to it, which doesn't mean that I can't enjoy a novel that I don't specifically relate to. There are plenty of novels that have things that I've never personally dealt with that I still related to, like The Poet X. I consider that one of my favorite books. I haven't dealt with pretty much any of the things that Ziamata has dealt with, but I didn't really connect with the characters. I do think that it was well written, and I can absolutely see why it has touched so many people and why it's so well loved. It just didn't really hit me as hard as I was hoping. Overall, I did give it 4 stars. So again, I enjoyed my time with it. I would still recommend it to pretty much anyone who's between 16 and maybe 21 especially, but I do think that people of any age could read this book and enjoy it. Next up, I read an e-arc of a graphic novel that I requested off of NetGalley, basically because I was just trying to request things that I thought I would get through pretty fast to try to up my feedback rating on NetGalley for. And so I didn't think that I would get accepted for it. I kind of requested it somewhat as a joke. But here we are. I read it. I rated it. I overall enjoyed it, and that is the graphic novel for Dream Daddy, the dad dating simulator. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was originally created by Game Grumps, but the graphic novel was written by multiple different storytellers and artists. Authors, I'll just say authors. So this graphic novel is actually a combination of 5 different stories, all by different authors. And each one kind of follows a different dad, and then the last one has all of the dads. Overall, they were pretty good. If I had to rate each one individually, they would be pretty spread out. I think I would give one of them maybe 5 stars, one of them 2 stars, and then just kind of in between. But overall, I did give it a 3.5 because I did enjoy it. It's not the best thing that I've ever read, and I would say unless you've actually played or watched some playthroughs of Dream Daddy, I don't think that you would necessarily get anything out of it. I have seen a few playthroughs. Yeah, if you like Dream Daddies, you'd probably like this graphic novel. Again, I enjoyed it. 3.5, solid read. The next book was another 5-star novel for me, and that is On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. I have been waiting for this novel pretty much since I read The Hate U Give, and I found out that she was doing another one. And honestly, sophomore slump, who? What? Angie Thomas dragged me through the dirt, and I'm thanking her for it, because this book was so good. It was so good. Like, I'm not going to compare it to The Hate U Give because they are very, very different novels, and I'm not going to say one is better than the other because they are so vastly different. The overall feel is very similar because of her writing style, and it does take place in the same neighborhood, but it's not a sequel, and even Angie says that it's not a spin-off. But it does take place in the same neighborhood, and it occurs, I believe, a year after the events of The Hate U Give, and that is mentioned in passing once or twice in On the Come Up. You know, it'll say the shooting that happened last year, or when that boy got killed last year. Other than that, it's a very, very separate novel. It's so good. It's so good. So basically, this book deals with Bree, our main girl right here, and she wants to be a rapper like her dad, who unfortunately got killed and several years ago. And he was a rapper, and so everyone knew him. His name was Lawless, and she really wants to be a rapper, but she doesn't want to just be a rapper in his shadow. She really wants to create a name for herself that's separate from him. She doesn't just want to be known as Little Law, or Lil Law, because, you know, LIL. So the book starts off with her going to a rap battle and just slaughtering her opponent after she chokes up on the first round. But it's just so interesting to see how her mind works when she's coming up with all these freestyles. Like, she'll pick out things about them and make words to rhyme in her head, and it's so good. And Angie actually wrote all of the raps herself, which is just mind-blowing because they're so good. And the family dynamic is so solid. I really love that about Angie's books, is the family dynamic and their struggles and how close they are and the things that can come between them. And it's just really good because Bree's mom is a former drug addict. She's sober now, but just kind of how that's dealt with, and you know, the flashbacks and what Bree still deals with and what the family still deals with as a repercussion of that. It's so good. I can't stop saying this. It's so good. Even if you haven't read The Hate U Give, which you should, you need to read this. Please read it. The next book that I read was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I did do a full reading vlog for this book, so I'll put it up there, and then I'll also leave the link down in the description. I did annotate this book, so that was kind of my first experience with that. Again, I talk more about that in the vlog if you're interested. It took me a long time to figure out what my rating for this book was going to be. So if you didn't know, I actually have a bit of a history with this book. I bought it when it first came out, and then I DNF'd it after about 120 pages because I just wasn't feeling it. And then this book kind of just, it got worse in my mind with each passing day, and that's how I discovered BookTube, because I just was looking for unpopular opinions of this book because I I let other people's hate fuel me for this book. So I originally never had any intention of picking it back up, but with The Wicked King coming out and everyone just still talking about this book series, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna get it from the library, because I've since then sold my physical copy. I'm gonna get it from the library and I'm gonna read it. So I did that, and it happened. I ended up giving it 3 stars, but it's complicated because the beginning of the book was so long and kind of boring. And then at the end of the book, so much happened. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I didn't think the world building was that great. I didn't connect to any of the characters, and I think several things were forced and unnecessary, and that's that on that. Next up, I have another graphic novel, and that is Heavy Vinyl, and this is by multiple authors. I gave Heavy Vinyl 4 out of 5 stars, and it was really good. It's a solid graphic novel. It is the first in a series, so I'm really excited to continue it because I think it was a very strong start. Basically, it takes place in the 90s, which is just my aesthetic. There's really good diversity and rep, in my opinion, in this book. But basically, it's just a badass girl group fighting the patriarchy. There's a secret fight club. They all work at a record store. And it's really good. It's really entertaining. It was a very quick read, even for a graphic novel. I got through it very fast. I do think it was a bit short. But I think if you wait till more volumes are out, because this is currently the only one out so far, then it probably won't feel quite as short. But I really liked it. I'm really excited. The next book that I read, I'm actually very excited to talk about because I think this is one of my new favorite books. And that is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. So I admit this was a total cover buy. I have had this on my shelf for a year and a half, 2 years? I don't know. Probably a year and a half. I don't even know how long it's been out. Not that long. But I finally decided to pick it up and read it. I was just in a very fae mood after I read The Cool Prince, probably because it left me wanting much more. But I'm so glad that I finally picked this up. I know it has quite a bit of mixed reviews, but I gave it 5 stars. I think it is really, really good, especially considering it's a pretty short standalone fantasy novel. I think it was executed really well. This novel follows Isabel, who is a painter for the folk, and it kind of follows her as she paints a prince, and it doesn't go well. She kind of paints him in a way that he doesn't like, and then she kind of has to answer to that, and it's really exciting. I know it's short, so you would want it to be fast-paced, but it is pretty fast-paced without being too fast. Like, you definitely get to sit in the story without it dragging on. I hope that makes sense. I know there's a lot of complaint that this has insta-love in it, but considering that it's only less than 300 pages, I think it was done really, really well. And I think pretty much everyone knows that this book has romance in it, so I don't consider that a spoiler, but it was just really fun. I think Isabel is a very strong female character. She's super badass without falling into that girl with a sword trope, and really just holds her own. She doesn't give up what she wants in life because of a man, and she definitely sticks with her values, and she does not accept death. Also, Rook is very, very dramatic, and I love him with my whole heart and would probably die for him. But I think my favorite thing about this book is just how the author executed the fair folk. But basically the book is centered around craft, which the humans can make craft, which would be cooking, painting, sewing, forging, different things like that. Anything where you create anything, that's considered craft, and the folk cannot make craft at all. Like, they will actually die if they cook. So they rely on humans to make the craft for them, and that's kind of why they let them live and exist near them, basically. Painting is considered a craft, so Isabel has a lot of folk clients, and she kind of provides that service for them in exchange for enchantments, which In typical fae fashion, the folk are very tricky and they can't lie, but they can definitely deceive you. So you have to be very, very careful in how you make deals and enchantments, kind of like making a wish with a genie. You know, you have to be very, very specific because it can go wrong very quickly. The folk are also very vain and put up glamours to kind of hide what they really look like, because they are kind of scary in typical fae fashion. However, with their glamours on, they do look more human, not quite human, and they all have flaws, like maybe their fingers are a bit too long or their eyes don't look quite right or different things like that. I just think it was really fun and really unique. If you like fae books, give this one a try. Next up is another audiobook, and that is The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. Yes, I am continuing my personal little Riordan-a-thon where I'm rereading all the books and trying to finally get to the ones that I have yet to read, because I own almost all of them. The Lost Hero is the start of the sequel companion series to Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I don't really know what it's classified as, but it does follow a group of new demigods, but also Percy and Annabeth and some old friends from the Olympian series are in it too, so it kind of follows both. If you like Percy Jackson and you haven't read these books, then you should probably get on that because they're really, really good. I actually haven't read the last book in this series yet, so I'm definitely getting to it this time, and I have yet to finish House of Hades, which is the 4th book in the series, the second to last one. So I'm really excited to finally finish those this time around. But in the meantime, The Lost Hero is really good, and it kind of follows this new great prophecy after the original one is fulfilled in the other series. I really like the new series because it does kind of incorporate the Roman gods in with the Greek ones and kind of how that balances out. It doesn't really well, so that's exciting. Obviously, I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, and thankfully, this series has a different narrator than the Percy Jackson series, because I probably would not have continued listening to the audiobooks if Jesse frickin' Bernstein had narrated this one as well. But no, thankfully, it is someone new, and I think that he does a very, very good job. That brings me to the last book that I read in March, and that is Son of Neptune by Rick Riordan. This is the only book that I completed for Fantasy AdventureAthon, which I did try to participate in this month, but it was the last week of the month and I was very, very busy the last week. I went on a road trip for 3 days and didn't really get to read it all, so this is the one book that I completed for that. But you know, I still had a good time, and there's always next year. Either way, this is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series and follows Percy as he goes to the Roman camp, which we get to see for the first time, and he meets Hazel and Frank, which are 2 characters that I absolutely adore, and just kind of follows them on their quest. It is the same narrator as The Lost Hero, so it was good. Even though technically it's a sequel, it does follow different events than the first book in the series, and then in the 3rd book is when they kind of merge, so I'll talk about that after I read it. But overall, I had a pretty good reading month. I think this is the best one that I've had so far this year, and I'm really excited to see what April brings. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.